The morning train to the city was unusually crowded, even for a weekday. Commuters in stiff suits and hurried steps filled the station like waves of ants rushing toward their tunnels. Among them was Daniel Carter, a young businessman in his early 30s. With his crisp navy blue suit and a leather briefcase, he looked every bit the ambitious professional chasing success. Daniel had been preparing for weeks for an interview at one of the largest firms in the city. A position that could change his life, a senior consultant role with excellent pay and prestige. He had bought a first-class ticket for the train, hoping for peace and quiet to review his notes one last time before facing the panel. As the train doors slid open, he stepped inside and found his seat. The carriage was bright, the leather seats comfortable, and the gentle hum of the train almost soothing. Daniel pulled out his notes, rehearsing possible answers in his mind. "Tell us about your leadership style," he whispered under his breath. But just before the train departed, movement caught his attention. A heavily pregnant woman entered the carriage. She clutched her bag with one hand, balancing herself with the other as she looked for a place to sit. Her face showed exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, swollen feet, and the weariness of someone who had been standing far too long. Daniel glanced around. Every seat was taken. Businessmen buried in laptops, women tapping away on phones, and elderly passengers dozing off. Nobody moved. Some glanced at her, but quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. Daniel felt a tug at his conscience. His seat was comfortable, his notes spread neatly across his lap, and he had paid extra for this spot. "I need this time, I can't afford distractions today," he thought. But when the woman steadied herself against the pole, wincing slightly, Daniel couldn't ignore it any longer. He stood up immediately. "Please, ma'am, take my seat," he said, offering a reassuring smile. Her eyes widened with relief and gratitude. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Daniel insisted, helping her sit down. "You need it more than I do." The woman sank into the seat with a sigh of relief, whispering, "Thank you, young man. You have no idea how much this means to me." Daniel gave a polite nod, standing by the door for the remainder of the ride, holding onto the rail as the train rattled along. He didn't get to review his notes. His suit wrinkled slightly, and his polished shoes collected dust from the floor. But deep inside, Daniel felt strangely lighter, as if doing the right thing mattered more than a perfect interview. Little did he know, this single act of kindness would define the outcome of his future in ways he couldn't imagine. The train finally screeched to a halt at Central Station. Daniel helped the pregnant woman gather her belongings before she exited. She gave him a grateful smile, one that lingered in his mind even after she disappeared into the crowd. Daniel straightened his suit, smoothed his tie, and checked his watch. He was running a little later than planned, but there was still enough time to reach the towering glass building where his interview would be held. The firm, Hamilton & Steele, was renowned for its rigorous selection process. Only the best and brightest made it through, and Daniel had spent countless nights rehearsing for this very moment. As he walked into the grand lobby, marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers, his nerves tightened. He signed in at the reception, was given a visitor's badge, and led to a waiting room where other candidates sat with stiff posture, eyes buried in resumes and tablets. Daniel sank into a chair, wishing he had gotten the chance to review his notes on the train. Instead, all he could think about was the look of relief on the woman's face when she had sat down. He wondered if she had reached her destination safely. After what felt like hours, the receptionist finally called his name. "Mr. Carter, please follow me." He entered a sleek conference room, walls lined with bookshelves and a long polished table at the center. 3 executives sat on one side, papers neatly stacked in front of them. And then his breath caught. At the head of the table sat the same pregnant woman from the train. She looked different now, her posture confident, her expression professional, though a flicker of recognition danced in her eyes as she studied him. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "What are the chances, Mr. Carter?" she said, her voice steady but carrying that same softness he had heard before. "Please, have a seat." He sat down, trying to hide his shock. The room felt warmer, his palms damp. He realized with a jolt, this wasn't just any executive. This was Evelyn Steele, the newly appointed CEO of Hamilton & Steele. The interview began formally. The other panelists asked about his experience, his achievements, his strategies for managing clients. Daniel answered as best as he could, though his mind still reeled from the coincidence. Every so often, Evelyn's gaze flicked to him, unreadable but somehow knowing. Halfway through, one of the executives asked, "Mr. Carter, can you describe a time when you demonstrated leadership or empathy under pressure?" Daniel hesitated. He hadn't prepared a polished story for this question. But then, without overthinking, he spoke about what had just happened on the train. How he gave up his seat, not to impress anyone, but because he couldn't bear to see someone in need suffer. The room grew quiet. The executives exchanged glances. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Daniel swallowed nervously, wondering if he had said too much. But Evelyn's eyes softened. She wasn't looking at just another candidate, she was looking at the man who had chosen kindness over comfort, even when no one was watching. The silence in the room stretched for several long seconds after Daniel finished speaking. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. The story he shared had been unpolished, unscripted, nothing like the rehearsed answers he had prepared for weeks. One of the senior executives finally cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. That was, certainly an unusual example. Most candidates mention leading teams or solving crises at work." Daniel forced a polite smile, though doubt gnawed at him. "Maybe I blew it, maybe I should have stuck to numbers and strategies instead of talking about giving up a train seat." But then Evelyn leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the table. There was a glimmer of warmth in her eyes now, one that softened the sharp professionalism of her face. "Unusual," she said, her voice calm but firm, "is not always a bad thing." The others fell silent, waiting. Evelyn turned her gaze directly on Daniel. "Mr. Carter, do you know what I was doing on that train this morning?" Daniel blinked, uncertain whether to answer. "Commuting," he offered hesitantly. A small smile curved her lips. "I was observing." The room seemed to shrink around him. Evelyn continued, her tone steady but tinged with something more personal. "I often take the train incognito, without a car or driver. I like to remind myself of what it feels like to be among ordinary people. You see, leadership is not just about numbers and reports, it is about people, their struggles, and how we respond to them." Daniel's throat went dry. He realized she was no longer speaking to the panel but directly to him. "This morning," Evelyn said, "I saw every passenger in that carriage pretend not to notice me. Except you." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Daniel sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. "You gave up your seat without hesitation," she continued, her eyes softening. "You chose empathy over convenience, kindness over self-interest. That, Mr. Carter, is exactly the kind of character I want in this company." Daniel's chest tightened with emotion. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Evelyn straightened her posture and addressed the panel. "I don't need to hear any more. My decision is made." One of the executives frowned. "But, Ms. Steele," she raised a hand, silencing him. "This company has enough people who can crunch numbers. What we need are people who can lead with humanity." Her gaze returned to Daniel. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. The position is yours." Daniel felt the air rush from his lungs, a mixture of relief and disbelief flooding him. He managed to stammer, "Thank you, I don't know what to say." Evelyn's smile was gentle, almost motherly. "Say nothing, just remember, titles and success come and go. But kindness, that leaves a mark no resume ever could." As Daniel walked out of the building later, the city skyline glowing in the afternoon sun, his briefcase felt lighter. He had gone into the day believing skill and preparation were everything. But now he knew, the smallest act of compassion, done when no one was watching, had opened the biggest door of his life. And deep down, he understood. Sometimes, the greatest interviews happen long before you ever sit in a boardroom.